Hey guys, how's it going? I'm back with the next installment of the series on blueprints for storming the castle. In this video, I decided to do an extra credit section on the Greek gift. In particular, we're going to look at some situations in which it seems like the Greek gift should not apply, but actually it does apply. The games and positions in this video were taken from the unofficial course textbook that has never been translated into English. And we're going to start off with a 1973 game between Pincus and Gizolak in Poland. And I did a little bit of research on the white player in this game, Karol Pincus. He's an IM from Poland, and he plays some excellent attacking chess. I found a really interesting game by him where he does an attack on the queenside castle. I will probably feature that game in a future video because the unofficial course textbook that has never been translated into English does not actually have any attacks on the queenside castle. So that's a good lead that we will need for deepening our study of blueprints on storming the castle. So the game starts with e4, e5, knight c3, and knight f6. This is the Vienna game, which is interesting. In particular, this is the Vienna Gambit. Sometimes it's referred to as the delayed King's Gambit because it has these two pawns that you also have in the King's Gambit, except that you play it after you've developed this knight. It's considered a more correct King's Gambit. As you know, if you watch my channel, I'm a big fan of lines that push the f pawn, and uh, folks have recommended to me that I should look into the Vienna game. But this is the first time that I see a game with it, so I'll probably be studying it more deeply after finding it in this interesting game. So Gizlek responds with d5. This is known as the Falkbeer variation of the Vienna game. As you can see, it's this pawn structure here is reminiscent of the Falkbeer counter gambit when it's played in the King's Gambit. So we capture. This is not possible in the traditional King's Gambit because it would expose you to the flank attack. Black captures with the knight, white develops a knight, and then this is a kind of a weird move. I'm not sure why black decided to push this pawn, but anyway. Black captures the knight, and white happily recaptures. Uh, as you can see, this opens a line of attack for the dark squared bishop. Black develops their bishop, white castles and black castles. So in this position, we see something that looks reminiscent of the Greek gift. You have the bishop here that can be sacrificed on h7. You have the knight that's ready to come into the attack. You have the queen that's ready to come into the attack, and of course the bishop that is supporting the knight. What's different here from the standard Greek gift sacrifice is that you have a bishop defending this square. So it would seem like you can't carry out the attack because when after the bishop gets sacrificed and the king captures, it seems like you can't continue with check because it would just be captured. So we'll see how Karol Pincus carries this out. So he starts by sacrificing his bishop, king captures, knight g5 check, and of course, as we discussed, the knight is captured. The queen comes out anyway with check. The bishop blocks, and then there's this very interesting move where the rook comes up here, basically to block the access of the queen and to add an attacker onto the bishop. So let's take a moment here to look at some possible. Oh, sorry. Let's take a moment here to look at some possible moves for black. So if black captures this pawn, then the queen can capture the bishop with check, the king moves back, and after this final pawn capture, checkmate here is unavoidable, or actually it is avoidable, but you have to sacrifice your queen. So after black sacrifices their queen, white just captures the queen, and it's pretty much game over. So black does not, in fact, capture the rook. They bring out their knight, and then the rook checks the king this way. And after the pawn captures, the bishop comes out to capture. And as you can see from the question marks there, Stockfish thinks this is actually a bad move. Black moved the rook out to the e file, which Stockfish marks as a mistake. And then white moves the bishop, allowing a discovered check and also hitting the queen. Black moves their king, and instead of greedily going for the queen, white puts their bishop here to try to set up a mating net. The knight captures, queen checks, and when the king moves away, we see that we end up with the same setup here that leads to a pretty inevitable checkmate position. So in this position, black resigned because there's really nothing you can do. If okay, so Stockfish actually gives the best move as turning in the queen, but that's pretty silly. If instead we try to do something like this, then this is checkmate. So basically, it's hopeless for black in this position. In the next position, this is a game between Grosspeter and Radulov in BN. I wasn't able to find the full game. This was the only thing that I could find, just this position. And what was interesting about this position is that there's no knight at all. There's no knight here that's gonna support the attack. It's just instead we have a rook. So from this position, white sacrifices the bishop. Black accepts it. The queen comes out to check. The king hides. And then we see this very interesting rook sacrifice here. And after black accepts it, it's check with the bishop, and the king hides, and then we have this discovered check. The king moves out of the discovered check, and then from here on, it's pretty much unavoidable checkmate. So this is a very interesting position because there was no knight here. Our next game is between Tal and an amateur in a simultaneous exhibition in Berlin. This game is very interesting because, as you may know, Tal is one of the masters of attacking chess. And so I was very excited to find this. I tried to find the complete game, but I wasn't able to find the complete game. I just have from this position on that was in our unofficial course textbook that has never been translated into English. This game is interesting because, as you can see, we don't have the knight on its traditional position, so it almost looks like the attack is not applicable, but it is. So we see bishop takes h7, check. The king captures it. The rook comes around to check, and now the king hides, and the knight comes to attack the queen. The Now the queen has to move, and it moves here to g5. So as you can see, now that the queen is guarding h5, the white queen cannot come here. So the attack is pretty much over, and white has to do something else. Just kidding, this is Tal. He is the master of attack, so the attack is not over. Instead, we get the incredible queen to h5, threatening checkmate on h8. Black captures the queen. White checks on e7, and then when black moves to h8, we get rook captures h5 with checkmate. So Tal was one of the greatest attacking players of all time, and people used to say that he was a hypnotist, that he would sit across the board from you and he would stare at you intensely, and that somehow he would prevent you from seeing the best moves. Whether or not that's true, the reality is that he played some of the most beautiful attacking chess, and it's always a pleasure to see his games. This next position is between Giffard and Nikolic. It was played in Banyo in 1979, and this one is interesting because there's this h pawn that has been pushed, and there's a rook behind it, and this shows sometimes what an interesting thing can happen if you leave your rook on h1. In this case, because white didn't castle, I don't recommend that, but the same thing can happen if white had canceled queenside. And so this is advocacy for opposite side castling. It enables you to have a rook pointed at your opponent's castle, which leads to interesting things like the one we are going to see in this position. The sacrifice begins, bishop captures on h7, black accepts it, and then the knight comes out to g5. The king hides, and now white brings the queen out to h5. Notice that what's being threatened here is the usual sequence of capturing here, and then when the king comes out to hide, then we bring the queen back, check. Then when the king goes there, we get check, and then is that checkmate? Actually, that's checkmate. Actually, yeah. So that's checkmate. In fact, it's simpler in this position. You can just do check, and then when the king goes there, it's just checkmate. So anyway, that's what's being threatened. But black can capture this knight. So that's what happens. And then now you see that the rook has been discovered along the h file to support the queen. So this is the interesting thing that can happen if you have your rook pointed at the opponent's castle. The king runs away, and now this pawn move on the opposite side of the board allows this bishop to join in the fun, and that's exactly what it does. The knight blocks it, and then it looks like the king is going to get away. It looks like it's going to be a king chase. But in reality, this is just going to be an interesting checkmate that uh, embraces the king from both sides of the board. The queen comes down to check. The king runs away, trying to run to the queen side, and even the rook comes in. But basically, it doesn't matter anymore because we're going to get this nice checkmate from both sides of the board. Actually, in this position, black resigned, but we can see the rest of the checkmate. The queen has to come in to obstruct, and then it's check, and then the rook comes in from the other side, and then at this point, it's just this interruption sacrifice by the rook, and we have reached checkmate. So I hope you like this video. Basically, it goes to show that there are situations other than the prototypical position in which the Greek gift can still be played. Um, uh, so there's a lot of variation here, and there's a lot of ways that you can be creative and apply it to your own games. Thanks for watching.